Do you want to test first or anything?
I just earphones on here.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Oh yeah, I can hear you say. This is an interview with Philip Tattersfield. The date is March 14th, 1994, and we're located in Vancouver. Good morning,
West
Philip.
Vancouver.
West Vancouver. Thank you. Good morning.
Yeah.
How are you?
Oh, fine. An old man. I'm hanging together very well.
Good. Well, you sound like you look good.
Good.
Thank you very much for agreeing to take time to talk with me this morning about your life's work as a landscape architect in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps we could begin with some biographical questions.
Right.
Can you please tell me where you were born and when?
In South London, England, on the 5th of June 1917, in the middle of the first Zeppelin raid on London, bombing raid. Yeah. That's why I have a nervous disposition.
It was lucky that you made it.
Yeah.
In South London?
South London, yeah.
Okay. And can you give me a bit of background, please, on your education?
Yes, I was entirely only high school. I got to grade 13. And like all my generation, we were sort of brought up in the pre-war area. We just had to go and do our thing. That was all there was to it. But I came out in, 38, 37. And by that time, I'd been in what is called the Territorial Army there, which is the reserve army. And they call us Saturday night soldiers because we usually have we do on Saturday nights, and but then you had a mandatory 2 years actual military camp every year. But then we were all called up. At first in 1938, they knew war was coming, and we were called up and had to do our military training. And then we were mobilized early in 39 before war was declared. So after that, the whistle was blown, and off we went. I was away for 6 years. I got back in 46, actually, 7 years. Yeah. And so, okay, I presumably, like my brother-in-law, I kind of gone to university and done something, but I thought, oh, to hell with it. I want to get out and forget all this nonsense. And the other thing I was determined to do was to get out of England because it was crowded, polluted, smelly, had a socialist government in, so we tossed up heads Canada, tails New Zealand, and it came down heads, and that's almost right.
So Canada was the winner. New Zealand could have been, but Canada won.
Well, we found the Canadian commissioner in London excellent. We went up there, and they did the whole bit for us and everything else, and the major element was, of course, that we were restricted in taking currency out of Canada, out of England into Canada. I think when we sailed in '52, we had $600. I think that was it. So we had 2 kids, $600 and a dog. But okay, we made it. Yeah. No, after I got back in the war, the thing was it sounds rather weird this, but I'd done an apprenticeship with a landscape. I was a designer come nurseryman come in South London, a man called J.F. Clark, and I spent 2 years with him actually, on and off. And then during the summer I worked for people called Thomas Cook at that time, and I used to take parties to Budapest, the Ticino, Lugano, Paradiso, all the way around Europe, bang, 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 bang. So this all melded together, so I was taken on a thing called the Federation of British Industries.
It's okay. No, the microphone's picking it up. It's
okay.
Yeah. Federation of British.
The Federation of British Industries, and I was called the Southern Regional Secretary, and I had an office in Reading in the south of England, in Berkshire.
I'm sorry. When was this time-wise?
This started as soon as I got back. This was in 47, 48.
Okay,
yeah,
all right, yeah.
And I was the Federation of British Industries is a sort of an umbrella economic unit of all the manufacturing industries and all the service industries. And I looked after the whole of the south of England, which was quite a big area, but we were involved in planning for distribution of industry under what was called the Greater London Plan. They realised from what the experience was given them in the war that to have all the industry in London was just stupid. Mm-hmm. So the idea was to push it out all the way around. And we had satellite towns developed, and I had one in Reading, Basingstoke, bang, 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 bang. And that was my job, was sort of industrial planning on that area. And you know, these things sort of develop. You find that however much you plan, it's the sort of serendipity element comes in. You know, you dig for water and strike oil, sort of thing. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So you have to be prepared to deal with oil.
Well, I stuck that. I got married in '47, and we didn't feel there was any money future at all for the kids or anything else. So that's when we decided to emigrate, and we actually got out in '52 and arrived in Quebec in June. And that's it. We looked at Toronto and we said, oh, for God's sake, they're making the same bloody stupid mistakes that every other big city's done, right? Mm-hmm. Well, Vancouver's going the same way, okay. And then we liked Montreal very much. I liked Ruby Foo, and I went to the Auberge and all these sort of places, and both cool. And Toronto we couldn't stand. We stayed in Willowdale for a short time, and all the Monday morning, all the detergent poured down the bloody streets, and I thought, oh God, this is terrible. So we nicked off, and by train, one of the last steam trains across. This was '52, and we got to Winnipeg, and we thought, well, this is fine, but what's it like in the winter? So we talked to the taxi drivers, and they said, well, it's 40 below with a chill factor of 20. On top of that, we said, oh, well, let's go on.
Keep going, yeah.
So the old train chugged along. It took us 4.5 days to get across. And we got to Calgary. We liked Calgary very much. And then we saw these mountains in the end, you know. We thought, Canada. And that's how we got here.
And so you came to Vancouver then in
what year?
In
52.
In 52.
Yeah. I actually arrived here in the end of June in '52, yeah, with 2 kids, a dog, and $600. That's all. Yeah.
2 kids, a dog, and $600.
The dog was a bull terrier we brought all the way with us.
Is that right?
Yeah, he was fine, except they stuck him in the guard's van right at the back, and our carriage was up the front. So every stop I had to get out of the carriage, hang on the bloody track about half a mile, take the bloody dog for a leak, and then put him back and come back again.
The whole thing was designed to keep you in shape. Just to keep
I think it's fairly successful in that respect. Yeah.
Yeah, just to keep you fit.
Yeah.
So then you got to Vancouver, and what opportunities awaited you
Well, they looked around. What I'd done, not knowing, with the result of my manufacturing connections, back in England, I came here with agencies for things like Johnson & Johnson and Parker Knoll chairs and one or two other of that ilk. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, if we can't get started here, I got some agencies I can get going. And of course, that was a naive situation. Once I started with Johnson & Johnson, the next thing I got was a lawyer's letter from New York saying, if you persist with this Tattersfield, you're in. Okay, this is a.
You won't be persisting much longer.
Yeah. Huh. So this, that, and the other, we managed to get, survive. A friend of my wife's mother, we had a very good friend here, the Copythorne family. He was one of these financial gurus, and he sort of set us straight and helped us out. And then eventually we started off, came over to West Vancouver, liked it very much indeed, so we rented a house over here, and I started in sketching designs and so on, and trying to, grab the knowledge that I'd had from way back. I was lucky in as much as because most of my army service had been in survey. I was a survey officer, and it means you had to navigate by desert compass. You had to do computation of coordinates by sidereal time and this sort of thing. So and of course you spent the rest of your time sketching panoramas with Germans in it. And I was in the artillery, and so we started off, and then I was very lucky. I had friends down in California, people called the Brinkerhoffs, and Cortland Paul. And Cortland Paul was a member of the State Board of Landscape Architects down there. And I went down there and did some work, and got into what was the California Association of Landscape Contractors at that time, which became a member of the AILA. Well, I belonged to the AILA. I became a director at large, and this was in about 54, 55, 56. And the suggestion was that we started a chapter of the AILA in BC. And to that end, in I think 59, Warren Lawson and other members of the California Association came up here with $1,000 in their hand and said, okay, chaps, let's start. So we set up a meeting, and there were about 8 of us to start with. I think we met at the Old Georgia Hotel, and the idea was to set up a chapter, and so that's what we did. Bingo. It means we had some status. This is the main thing. We were a chapter of the BC Society. Do you want some dates on that?
Sure. I kind of, I must have missed how you went from being here in Vancouver to the California connection. You had mentioned the names of the people.
Well, I got work down there. I went down there and buzzed around and met a lot of people, and managed to get enough work to keep me going. Bang, 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 bang. Yeah. But in other words, it was a sort of trigger anyway.
Yeah. And what were the real sort of issues in terms of landscape design that drew you in that direction? What were the...
Well, I think the thing is to... I've got a copy of it here, but I got very good publicity in a thing called the Landscape Journal in California, on a thing called the Pole, P-O-L-E, vernacular. And what I did there, I did an article in which I showed that the totem pole, it was typical of the whole of the Pacific Rim, or the Ring of Fire, okay? You have them in New Zealand, you have them in Japan, you have them in China, in the Aleutians, all the way down through Alaska, right the way down Chile, Peru, bang, 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 okay? And this is, to me, if you like, the BC totem is, the vertical tree and the horizontal lake is a fact. This was the type of thing, so following that through, I got involved down there in the first garden apartment sort of surge that came off at Bodmy in the late 50s. And to that end, we used poles. We used poles for retaining things vertically. We used poles split for steps in a sort of orange peel effect. We used rounds for stepping stones. We did all. In other words, we tried to come in with a natural resource type of building, rather like Ron Tom was doing here at the same time, the architect. And so that went down pretty well. And the next major element was that a man called Bradner had been down there as well. He was a developer in BC, and he brought the garden apartment concept up here. And we had the first one was at Delbrook here, which was financed by SNEAMHC. And the architect in that case wanted to fill in a big ravine, So we told him not to be so bloody stupid. The ravine was the asset. So we produced a lake in the ravine with all the various things around it. I've got pictures of that if you're interested. And that started off a complete run of garden apartment development. And it was copied later on, but I got into, I suppose, must have been 20 or 30 of them. Bang, 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 bang. So that really sort of triggered everything. And it's typical of BC anyway, is that we tend to develop anything sort of 5 years up from California. We take something and develop it here. And I see nothing wrong with that. I mean, the Japanese have been doing it for centuries with Chinese and so on. So it seemed to me then we'd really got hold of something here. And people, of course, in California had their own development style of landscape architecture, which is, of course, very, very open. And anyways, outdoor living was the thing. Well, okay, in BC we can do it for 3 months of the year, but you have to be a bit careful how you do it, because it doesn't always work out. But I think the same attitudes in terms of creating outdoor space and so on are very similar. Outdoor enjoyment, you get into the barbecue and the pool and all the rest of it, tennis courts and blah 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 blah. Apart from the garden aspect. So that. We got to the point there where I was doing design and then contracting. This would be in, say, 56, 57, 58. And then by about 59, the design function provided enough money so that we could actually live on it.
And then that coincides with where I had interrupted you. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You said that there were about 8 of you who had started the chapter.
That's right. Yes. So this is the nucleus.
Yeah.
I've got names, I think, here if you need them.
Okay.
I think I can find them. I have to confess to weakness and put on my glasses. I just haven't had them very long, and I have real pain. I find these things.
Yeah. They help, though, from time to time.
The fertile soil, bang, 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 bang. There we are. The following individuals, some later became active members of the profession. Here we are. Desmond Muirhead, Heinsberger, Barbara Mather, Ina Burleson, myself, Peter Jack, and Ral Rubelard, okay? And then we had people who were working in the public domain, in BC Electric, John Neal, UBC. Now Frank Buck, he was the landscape architect, the first planner in the city of Vancouver, I think from about 1928 onwards. Edwards was CMHC, Savory was Works in Victoria and did a lot of work. He did the provincial garden layout there in the museum. Livingston was the Board of Parks here, and Michael Pope. But these were the first sort of group that really came up to that, okay?
Would you read these names out again slowly, and then I'll be able to get them from the table?
Yeah, well, I can take copies if you like.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. Well, that was the group, but then, as I say here, we went to California in 54, blah, 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 started a federal charter, blah, 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 profession was reported, state board landscape architect, blah, 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 both merged, blah, 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 right, strata title. Well, then they came back here from garden apartments, we went to town housing, again, another California concept. And then strata title.
What is that?
Strata title, where you have a house only, and then common land outside. That's still going in lots of places. And condominium and leaseback. Well, these are all things that came out of the housing development in California, and we were using it up here. So. So here, it was therefore reasonable to suggest that a profession involved in this process would follow a similar pattern. This, in fact, did happen and continues to happen, okay? And then I go on to say in 55, I was working under license in California, you saw it down there.
Yes.
And in 1957 applied for membership of AILA. Excuse me. And I was accepted as a member of large for British Columbia.
What year was that, sorry?
That was in 57.
57.
Well, and at that day, with Barbara Mather, now Barbara was one of the first people I met here, and I thought she was a member of the CSLA, a very early member. She had her own herb garden in North Vancouver, and she was doing quite a lot of work on that. And we made a joint request to the CSLA, in town plan as it was, to set up a BC section. This request, repeated intervals, was denied. And then the kicker here is that Clive Justice, when he was president, got the component society thing going, and we got that 76. So it took 20 years to get.
What was the reason for them? Did they ever give you a reason for denying?
Yeah, we weren't professional enough. I think that was the answer. They didn't say so much, but I guess that was it. This we'll get into this later, but also this question that came in later. Well, I don't want to jump ahead, but this attitude of attitude to the badge or a badge is still very prevalent here. A lot of our members still suffer from it very badly.
Meaning what?
That unless you had a highly regarded degree qualification from somewhere like Harvard or somewhere, you don't count. Oberlanders, Cornelius like that, Lancius is like that, several. They only jumped on our bandwagon once we got our legislation through, you see. They waited and waited, and in point of fact, they started a society to oppose us while we were going for legislation. But once we got our legislation, okay, bang.
What do you think, is there kind of an underlying reason for that? What do you think the reason for that is?
Insecurity of the individual, I think. Yeah. They're worried that what they're doing is going to be undermined by a bunch of bloody amateurs.
I guess there's needs there, within professions. There's certainly at different points in time, there are needs for certain kinds of standardizations. But perhaps at the time that you were working, things were different.
Oh yeah, no way you could get legislation at all at that point. When we did apply for legislation, we were actively opposed by the planners and by the architects.
This is for a name act?
Yeah. We had to go to Victoria and appear before the Private Bills Committee, and the architects, no, we're invading their traditional areas of expertise, blah, blah, blah. Planners the same, blah, 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 blah. The planners still are not even registered here. But still, that's another story, perhaps.
It's interesting, those kinds of debates within a group of people that need to work together, that there isn't that sort of camaraderie and sense of solidarity within the group to help the group move forward.
Well, interesting you should pick on that, because one of the lawyers we were involved with from UBC was, one of his criticisms of our society was that we had to get our own house in order before we got public recognition, and we still haven't got our own house in order. We've got, does the Klein report mean anything to you? The ASLA Klein report, K-L-E-I-N. Well, they did a very big study, I think in the 70s, on landscape architecture, where the students went, blah, 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 blah. And like everybody else, they came to the conclusion that the profession consisted of two main groups, the boundary containers and the boundary expanders. And I think in BC, certainly, I don't know about the rest of Canada, but I think we're still in the realms of the boundary containers. I don't know how many our people in BC worked abroad. I think Clive and I are about the only two. I worked in Africa, East and West Africa, the Caribbean, and all, Israel, and all over the place. Until they get out of the BC environment and see what's going on in other places, I don't feel that they're more than sort of half equipped. But that's personal view.
You worked in the Caribbean and Africa after you had come to Canada?
Oh yes, yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. I I worked for the Canadian International Development Agency in the Ivory Coast, in Cote d'Ivoire, and in Kenya. And the Caribbean was a private development. We were down there in the British Virgin Islands. Very nice. But wouldn't like to stay there, I don't think.
Now, this was all doing landscape design?
Yeah, oh yes, vast areas. We one in the Caribbean, we had 2 islands to develop with schools, farms. We even had a crazy scheme for barrage balloons to make it rain. That sounds silly, but to make it rain.
Yes.
Because the
what
rain
did you call them, barrage balloons?
Barrage balloons are big things that you had to stop the aeroplanes bombing, you know. Go up on a cable.
Yeah.
They're supposed to clip the ranges off the planes, which it did in some cases. But these balloons used to go up, and then you seed them with silver nitrate, and that would precipitate rain. But it didn't really work out. But these sort of ideas, you know, are fun.
Yeah.
Where were we?
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
okay,
I digressed a bit.
That's okay. 1957, the founding of, how do you put this? IALA, is that what?
Well, it's sort
AILA?
it's an informal group of people with a common interest. I mean, that's what it really amounts to. And
developing, as you said, a BC chapter of that group.
Yes,
so that you had a
yes, we had. As I was the member at large, my instructions from the AILA were to form a chapter here in BC, which we did. Now that was in '58. Then, to our surprise, a man called Helmut Schmidt from Ottawa formed a chapter in Ottawa, and a man called Louis Perron formed a chapter in Quebec, in Montreal. So here we had the, if you like, the embryo national organisation developing, and of course the CSLA obviously were panicking in the wings, you know, sure they were.
Now these both, the Ottawa and the Montreal ones, were chapters
of
the
AILA.
AILA.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Helmut Schmidt, he's gone back to Germany. He's a big-time politician there now. Robillard, Perron is dead now. He's, Louis was a great man. He knew the political graft complex in Quebec absolutely right down to the last button. He made a lot of money at it, I think, too.
Yeah. Well, he's left some to the society too.
Yeah. I think he's probably one of the few landscape architects who's made any money.
He and why is his name gone? One of the founders.
Oh, Donington Grubb?
Yes.
Yes, Donington Grubb would have done too, yeah.
And so then, how did the BC chapter of AILA eventually become the BC Society?
Okay, all right.
CSLA.
We'll read on then, okay?
Okay.
If I just read through this, then you can pick out what you want.
Okay.
I say, in the capacity as ALA member large, I endeavour to interest fellow practitioners in membership of that body, okay, to gain sufficient strength to form a BC chapter, which we did. Now, this was a delegation from California. Lawson's the only man who survived at the moment. I got a picture of him. But the interesting thing here is the people who came to our meeting were Luffa Goody, who was in the public works in the provincial government. Heinz was the Russian prisoner. Lino was a Norwegian. Clay was BC Electric. Clive was working with Muirhead then. Livingstone, myself, and Webb was working with Clive. So that was the the sort of basis from which we worked, and that was on September the 12th, 1960. Okay. So reactions were mixed. The majority felt that some expression of common interest would be beneficial. However, as a direct effect of this lunchtime discussion, the BC member at large was asked to call an organisational meeting for anyone interested in some form of professional body. Okay, invitations were sent to everyone known to be active in the profession, and that we had a meeting at the University of BC at 3 o'clock on Wednesday, the 26th of October, 1960. I'll give you this if you like.
Okay.
And they're the people who came to the meeting, right? Bang, 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 bang. Now, if you look at this, this man was golf course architect, Gaffer about almost the same bunch of people. And I think the only man who had any sort of degree there was Neil, who was degrees in horticulture. Okay. The following motion, blah, 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 blah. The meeting nominated me as chairman and a working committee, Tattersfield, the matter was blah, blah, blah. It's only 61. We sent out 20 application forms, of which 9 had been forwarded to ALI for approval. In other words, we were being a chapter of AILA, we had to send all the applications to California for approval. 9 out of these were accepted. So, okay. In other words, people like McCann, he was entirely in golf courses. He was an engineer, etc. So they only didn't accept everybody.
And there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13 people there.
Yeah. So 4 were rejected. We don't say who they were. We say with this base we secured more than 8 member minimum required to form a chapter. So we did. We formed a chapter. Bang, 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 bang. Meeting was held at Faculty Club, University B, on Wednesday, the 12th of January, 61. And there's the charter membership. Okay.
Would you just read those names out so that we've got them down there?
Yeah, I'll run these off for you, or whatever you like. This, we made Neil the president. Now, this gave us the university sort of cover. We were respectable, okay?
Politically correct.
Well, we needed something, some anchors, because we got nothing on this. And so the first organisation of landscape architects in BC was born. So,
okay. And then Clive Justice was vice president.
He was the vice president.
Secretary.
I was secretary, yeah.
And Heinz Berger, who's bishop? What was?
Yes, Bernie Bishop. He came out of Oregon. He was a student at UBC.
First name, sorry? Bernie?
Bernard Bishop, yeah.
Einar Brodersen?
Brodersen, Norwegian. Savory Public Works, Victoria.
What was is there a first name on that?
Robert
Savory.
Michael Pope. He was Highways in Victoria, and Harry Webb. Yeah.
Okay, good.
There we are. So we came to the year 61. Blah, 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 the LA, let's go, there's professional support, the financial support, the first vital steps, blah, 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 practice management. Blah, blah,
what did you do for finances? How was that looked after?
Yeah.
Did you have membership fees? Or?
Yes, we put it all together then, and we had, I think we all competed $20 to start with, something like that.
Did you have to pay to AILA, and then they...
No, they paid us, they gave us $1,000. Start. Yeah, very good, very good. Sort of seed money. Yeah. Well, then it says from the original charter meeting, 61, we grew to 12 members in 62, 15 in 63, and the decision was taken early in 1964 to incorporate the BC Society of Landscape Architects under the Societies Act, where the constitution and bylaws are modelled on those of the American Institute of Landscape Architects. The charter for the new society was granted on April the 21st, 1964, with a total of 20 charter members. Bang, 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 bang. Right?
Yes.
So now this is where things started to. This is where the sort of what shall I say, professional aggravation came in now. Because we'd got this going, there were a lot of people practicing here who'd come out of Harvard and other places. So I've quoted some. There was Vaughan, who'd been out of Oregon. There was Lancius out of New York. Cornelia Oberlander out of Harvard. Who else was there? Muirhead, who'd never done anything except he'd done a part-time course at Oregon. Yeomans, he came out of the woods from somewhere, from I think Ontario, but these people didn't regard us as being professionals. Boom. Okay, you may have a chaps and everything, bang, 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 but we're not going to join. Well, they didn't. Okay, fine. So it said then the 64 to 71 saw intense activity on the part of the membership, and we embraced all aspects. Bang, 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 bang. Now, this is where one of the facts that I think we've missed out on. In that period of time, from 64 to 71, 72, our BC Society was very, very active in future plans for Vancouver, on housing, on transit. We were yakking to everybody. We appeared before council, we appeared before federal fisheries, we appeared before all the urban planning people, and we had some, very definite ideas. Well, now, to my regret, since that, very little's happened. We don't, as a society, we're mute. We're dead scared we're going to offend somebody and not get any work. I mean, that's what it amounts to, which is unfortunate, okay.
And as a result of those kinds of things, do you feel that there were major changes made because of what landscape
Oh yes,
architects were saying?
very, very much so.
Can you give me an example of
Yes,
any of those?
in highways, for instance. For one thing, Michael Pope was doing a very good job there, and we eventually produced a thing called the Highway Environment Conference, which used to meet each year. And then as a result of that, I spent, I think, 5 years going to the National Convention of Highway Ministers and Deputy Ministers, which we had, and I used to talk on highway environments and end-to-end construction and this sort of thing. And I did quite a lot of that, and to my undoubted surprise, I got a feedback from that. I got several very good jobs here from the Highways Department on major, highway, upper levels highway design and all this sort of thing. Well, it's reciprocal. If you give something, you're likely to get something back, okay?
What were were there some basic kinds of design concepts that were part of that? Was there a basic kind of approach that?
I think so. Yes, we were looking at, well, for instance, on the Knight Street Bridge, we were working. I was producing a combination, sort of a psychological function. In other words, we wanted to slow traffic down, so I took the view that, when you're going down a road, your telephone poles, if you're going at 30 miles an hour, go bonk, 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 bonk. Okay, so my point was that if you were to put the poles together, you go bonk, 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 you'd think you were going faster than you actually were, then you would slow down, okay? And we used this on the Knight Street off ramps. Instead of poles, we used humps, right, and planted them. And I think people may have reacted subconsciously. There's no way I could prove that they did, but it was an effort to make landscape architecture, if you like, a psychological tool as well. And I think this is where we're missing out quite a bit on this stuff.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Do you I don't mean this to sound any other way than please just take it at face value. Going by what you've said so far, when you were doing this work on the highway construction, highway design, were you calling yourself a landscape architect?
Yes.
Definitely.
Yes, definitely. Oh, yeah. My God, we were landscape architects in as much as we had a society, a British society, BC Society of Landscape Architects, period. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, other people could have called themselves landscape architects at that time, but then, of course, we tightened the thing up a little bit in the next section. Mm-hmm. Shall I go on?
Sure, go right ahead. Yeah.
Now, one of the big things, and I think we haven't been given enough credit for this, is that in 64, 65, we found that the work that we were doing, our group, was doing very well indeed, but we could not get good staff. So we went to the BC Institute of Technology, and under the chairmanship of Heinz Berger and Gail Stewart, and myself and Ida Brodesheim, we were retained by the Institute. We designed a program for them which would produce a landscape technician. And they would issue it with a diploma, and these boys would be into drafting and plant taxonomy, soil science, this type of thing. So that provided, it said, now, the other thing which really, I think, showed me there was a sort of a ground swell of reaction to the environment. Several of us were teaching. I was teaching at BCIT, and one year there I had a class of 72. Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. So in other words, there was a tremendous sort of search for expertise, people who were wanting to get into not only design, but people like looking after cemeteries, turf, golf courses, this type of thing. There was nothing available. So this is what triggered this, I think, and I think it's still going, that land technician's course. Right?
What were, when you were teaching the students, what were what was the basis of your design philosophy? What?
In other words, it has to be, you've got to marry the human requirement to the environmental capability. That's what it meant. So my theory was that you had to devise what was called a carrying capacity. And as you can see now with our logging, the carrying capacity has been overwhelmed, and the thing's a mess. So that was basic. I'm just trying to think. There was a Roman architect, was it Hadrian, who said that venusitas utilitas, in other words, it has to be beautiful, it has to be useful, and it has to be affordable, I think. The three elements. Okay. Then I said, in July '66, the Minister of Trade and Industry in the Social Credit government, in the annual meeting of the DC Society of Chartered Accountants, made a remark that professional organisations should be self-regulating. So, okay, Tattersfield went off and saw him. I said, hi, John, bang, bang. So I met him in the Hotel Vancouver on the 12th of August. The minister agreed that the society should seek legislation. He pointed out it was strewn with pitfalls, and the present political climate was not entirely favourable to the professions. Bang. Certainly not in terms of traditional exclusive professional legislation. In other words, licensing, don't bother, chum, you won't get it. However, he put us in touch with a lawyer who'd been in the Attorney General's department. His name was Jerry Cumming. And at the beginning of September '66, myself, Michael Pope and Neil, we went to Vancouver Island and Torres Cross, and bang, 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 bang. We devised the strategy for getting legislation, okay? So, the fall of '66 saw the Directors Society agreeing to a proposal before the President that each member of the Society be assessed $100 to defray costs, providing a war chest of $2,000, okay? This was a total disbursement estimated for legal fees, advertising, printing and publicity. The campaign was...
how budgets have changed.
Yeah. The campaign was launched on the 4th of April '67. Mr. Cross was adamant. Mr. Cross, the lawyer, said, and this is interesting, his first questions to us were, do you want a professional act? Are you prepared to do exactly as I say? If so, you will get your act. So the societies said, okay. So the first decision was to go for a government bill or a private bill. Okay, well, we went for a private bill on his recommendations, bang, 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 bang. And Evan Wolf, MLA, was the man who put forward a sponsor for an act respecting landscape architects.
What was his last name? Wolf?
Wolf, W-O-L-F-E.
Wolf. Okay.
Yeah, Evan Wolf. He was an MLA, one of the big car dealers in Vancouver. Yeah. Then we had to define the scope of the act. Now, Cross, the opinion of the traditional action of the architect were unattainable. Okay.
What was unattainable?
The licensing act, rather like the architects, was unobtainable. Nobody where you're going to get it. And I kept hammering at the people in Ontario on this, Vandermeulen and all these people. I said, you're stupid. You know, you're not going to get it. And they didn't. They got just registration.
Why is that? Just to interrupt, sorry.
Well, simply because the political climate is reluctant to give any professional group now exclusive powers. You're seeing it's turning up now with the BC Medical Association and so on. They've got, members accused of rape and sexual harassment and God knows what else, and the public doesn't like this in-house sort of, cozy chaps support each other, bong, 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 okay? And I tend to agree with it.
So your license to practice is not governed from the society, within the society, but from the provincial government.
Yes, they appoint a board of examiners by cabinet council, ordering council every year. Bang, 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 bang. Now the board of examiners then delegates to the directors certain things. Bang, 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 bang. Okay, Ellen. Okay. That's a good. It's a good procedure. Now this layer thing is tending to upset this, and it worries me. I've been talking to Fushti, the member who's also a lawyer. They're coming up with a resolution. They want to alter the designation so that the words landscape architect can apply to a company. And I said, well, that's stupid. You can't. The Act says it's individual. You, Tattersfield, Justice Neil, it's a professional badge, a professional name. You can't delegate this to a limited company or bang, 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 bang. So that's where it's up in the air at the moment.
Okay.
So what we did, we went for a private bill, and the first indications we had the trouble with the Architectural Institute of Canada to the conditional withdrawal of objection of the Societies Incorporation. The same objection were raised in respect to possible legislation. The architects demanded their traditional right, inverted commas, to practice landscape architecture as a complementary discipline to their own. At this time, the profession suffered the incursion of the engineer into the design of megastructures, and in other words, at this point in time, the architects were dead scared because all the high rises were being built by engineers, not architects. Okay.
And then the landscape architects were going to come along and do the other parts.
That's
so,
right.
Yeah.
The architect could see that his bread and butter being
A lot of erosion there.
That's right.
And not in a physical sense.
And then, of course, the subsequent discussion with Tony Robertson of the Planning Institute produced negative response. In fact, the plans were not a legislative provision, or that matter in Canada. Bang, bang, bang. Okay. So, but a later interview with the registrar of the Engineering Institute of BC produced a warm letter of support. Bang, 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 bang.
Went quickly, didn't it? Sorry, you were saying Cross rubbed his hand.
Well, Cross rubbed his hands. He said, the more opposition we get, the more our chances improve. He said, it's a Chinese approach, but the politician doesn't like to be told. And these people, he said, let's get them in front of the Private Bills Committee, stating their opposition, because that will tend to be in your favour. And it was. He was a cunning old fellow. Well, he's experienced, I suppose.
Yeah. So the private bill was passed in what year then?
Well, this was in the 13th of September 1967. We appeared in front of the Private Bills Committee, and it said then it was obvious an open form of act only would be acceptable, and intense questioning from the committee removed the age limits. Now, we had an age limit on our thing of 18. They said, why do you want an age limit? I said, okay, take it off. Educational level, and objections were entertained. Now, this question of traditional forms of practice. In other words, what they did, the committee's proposal that definitions of the profession should be eliminated from the Act completely. Well, we have no definition in our Act at all, so we can do anything we damn well like. If we want to build a high rise, I'm sure we could, subject to the engineering constraints. Yeah. Well, so that's a fascinating blowback on that one. So this went on the 6th of April 1968, we had an act respecting landscape architects, and it was given royal assent. Now, what I do here is read this piece, because this brings in the, if you like, the abrasive element from the people who were in and the people who were out.
Okay.
And so the unanimity of purpose and the euphoria of 68 carried the society along into 69. It then became evident that some of the newer members and particularly recent immigrants, were dissatisfied with the society in that they had little in common with the body of the membership. This resulted in the formation of the BC Society of Landscape Planners, which did not continue for any length of time as an active group. However, it was unfortunate that energies which could have been utilised in consolidating the society's position were dissipated in such fashion. From April the 6th, 1968, the title of landscape architect was the prerequisite of those members in good standing of the BC Society of Landscape Architects. It therefore followed that all who wished to practice professionally under that title must apply for membership of the society. This resulted in applications from several individuals who had stood passively at the edge and in the wings whilst the society's members had acted out the essential steps for its establishment as a duly legislated profession in Canada. And this is where I meant the Lancers and the Vaughans and the Oberlanders came in at that point. I didn't mention them in there because it's interesting, isn't it? Fascinating.
Now, at that point in time, then, 1968, when that bill was given royal assent, did the BCSLA become a component of the CSLA?
No.
What's the connection there?
That didn't come up until 1976.
What took so long?
I have to ask the CSLA that.
I'd like to know what you think.
Oh, we had tremendous meetings with them all over Canada, with Ted Walker in Saskatchewan and Graham in Ottawa and all these sort of people, and didn't get anywhere at all. They didn't regard us as being professional. That's all. We got an act and everything else, and we're going bang, 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 bang. And after all, those 20 people, we were the first legislated landscape architects in Canada in 1964, period. And that irritated us last year when, what's his name, Clark came up and said that, we were actually last year celebrating our 25th anniversary as legislated landscape architects. And this buddy man from Ontario came up and said, oh yes, well, Ontario's doing the same. Well, what he did, he took his date from the first grouping, not from his legislation, because Ontario didn't get legislation until 16 years later, 1984. And we helped them as much as we could with all our experience, So that really, burned us up a bit. Their 25th is in the year 2000.
Yeah. That was 25 years for OALA of what in?
No, just their loose formation before they became a legislated body. Well, we took our 25 from the date we got provincial legislation. Bang. Yeah. And that's why the only thing that I really insisted upon this is that I had my stamp had number 1 on it. It has number 1, period. So I always regard myself as the first legislated landscape architect in Canada, period. And now I'm probably the oldest. Yeah. What am I now? 77 this year, which is.
Well, I think you probably got another 77 to go.
Well, I don't know, maybe. So there we are. How does that?
That's a very good
sort of rundown on the thing. Yeah.
I might, with your permission, perhaps borrow one of those documents just to make sure that we've got all the names.
Oh yeah. Well, you can have this. Yeah.
I can also.
This is at the annual general meeting. This was put down. So.
Oh, good.
Well. There we are. That's da. This is just a fair copy, but I think that'll give it.
Oh yes, it's definitely readable.
Growth. I think they're germination. There we are. How's that?
Great, thank you very much. I'll send this back to you.
Yeah, when
Sure.
any time. I'm running a bit short of copies, so I send them all over the place. But
No, I'm happy to return it.
but that gives you the the guts of the how the thing started here.
Yeah.
In other words, it's I suppose I could say with a little, fairly modestly, that the action I took in the early 60s resulted in the BC Society developing. I mean, it was an initiative that I felt was very, very worth. I thought that in order to become credible, you had to have at least comparable professional, what shall I say, description anyway, if nothing else. And I think that's paid off.
Yeah.
But I don't think that what shall I say, not necessarily euphoria, but I think that the confidence which we gathered at that stage in having achieved this, I don't think it's been built upon and extended. I think it's, because it was there, you get all the lunatic fringe jump in, okay, and then the thing becomes static. You know, there's no more dynamism in the thing at all. There's no boundary expanders. I think you've got them in Ontario, and people like Helm and so on, and Brad Johnson and these sort of people, and who's the little Englishman in begins with M? I forget his name. People who've worked outside the country and done quite a lot of work.
Oh, Michael Huff, is that who you were thinking of?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of his name. He came here. I'm sorry, I'm blah, 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 blah.
There are too many other things in there right now.
It'll probably come to me before we finish.
Well, maybe with that as a basis, we could move on to some of the other kinds of questions here. Something that I would like to ask you about is, what do you think that landscape architecture has done for Canada? Do you think that, how different would the place be, and Canada as a whole, if you like, or maybe just British Columbia, whatever?
Well, I think we got two very big pluses. Firstly, as in Harper's day, was the development of the national park system. Now, landscape architects were absolutely paramount in that. And Doug Harper, I think, should be canonized for his work he did there. And the second is, another man who should be canonized is Ed Hlubowicz, who did the Capital Commission. Now, these are very highly visible landscape architectural oriented functions, okay? We've also got the Wascana thing in Saskatchewan, and I think that was Walker. Another man who should be canonized, I think. In the early days of Ontario, I think you've got Dunnington Grubb, who did the Hamilton, the entrance to the city of Hamilton and this sort of thing. Tremendous business. We've had people like Robert Savory in Victoria, who, in spite of the fact of being in a provincial public works department, really elevated the profession, in as much as he did all the sculpture and casting for the provincial gardens in Victoria and the museum and so on. In other words, he showed how you could, landscape architect wasn't a matter of putting a few bloody flowers in it. You know, he's into architecture, he's into landscape architecture and sculpture and everything together. You know.
And how have some of these things, like the national park system, what for instance has that really given the average Canadian?
Well, it's given them preservation of open space for all time. There's no doubt about that at all. And now it's being expanded through the UN in the heritage landscape function. Okay, now I think this is part of the IFLA contribution. Okay, very much so, because we pushed for this when we were involved. Although IFLA was a Class B organisation under UN funding, we were certainly getting into this type of thing, and Anthony Island was part of the work that came out of that, I'm sure.
I don't know.
It's up in the Queen Charlotte's. It's a heritage landscape. It's an old Gwai Haida village and so on. Yeah. But I think these are functions that wouldn't have happened, or probably not in the same degree, without the landscape architectural input on this.
Maybe because you've mentioned it, now might be a good time to ask the question about IFLA. What do you think the role of IFLA and Canada, or the role of Canada in IFLA is, or the role of IFLA for Canada? Do you think that there's a necessity to have a worldwide organization of landscape architects?
Emphatically, yes. We've got to get out of this sort of ghetto complex that we got into. After all, I know it's a trite thing to say, but people all over the world are pretty well the same. They've got to eat and sleep and survive, bang, bang. And I think Canada's role here is, as I mentioned before, it has to be, in my view, the sort of bridge element between North and South America and Europe. And there is no love lost between Europe and North and South America. There never is, because, in other words, the person receiving handouts is never very popular. Okay, either one side or the other. You don't like the person giving the handout. And this is true, if you like, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the French, the British, and now the Americans. It's in trouble if you're becoming empirical. This is part of the problem. Okay, so and I think Canada's role, I think we achieved a fair amount in this. We managed to ice the Americans down quite a bit in their day. They were tending to take over IFLA. And then we got them to limit their contribution to 25% of the total income, bang, bang, so that they, didn't produce 8 delegates to 1 for Canada. Now it's 2, I think, or 3 for Canada, but that was a problem. And also, Canada being if you like, an industrially organized country, and if you like, rich, so-called, we had a role in order to provide the educational means for the less Mexico, Chile, Peru, all the way down, Colombia, Argentina, Brazil, and so it goes on. Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, bang, 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 bang. Turkey, Italy still hasn't got it done. Greece, Israel, Iran. Yeah. Then in Africa, we've had several. In South Africa, I went to South Africa to see what they were doing down there, and in extreme west Durban, in that part of the world. Then at Natal, Dakar, all these places.
Canada's role in education, you
education, providing the educational framework, if you like. We've got. We haven't mentioned that yet, but we set up a degree thing here in BC. But we have the expertise to provide the way. For instance, when we had the IFLA meeting in Istanbul, the outcome of that was the formation of the Turkish Society of Landscape Architects. In other words, the politicians in Turkey wanted to be quite certain that there was enough muscle behind this application in order to put this through, and that's how it went through. Now, I think that's true in every country. Now, it happened in BC to a lesser extent. We had the political muscle developed after we sort of fed the stuff in, and it's the only way you can achieve anything, and I think that's Canada's role to do that.
Just to play devil's advocate for a little bit longer here, what actually does Canada achieve by having a landscape architect institute or society in a place like Turkey or like the Philippines or Colombia? What does that really do?
Exchange is the internet, international network. In other words, when I was doing mine reclamation here in BC, my friends in South Africa gave me all the answers. They've been doing it for years, bang, 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 bang. And I think this is where the reciprocal element comes in, very much indeed. For instance, I did a lot with Roberto Burle Marx in Brazil, because he is a master of color. And that's the one thing we did scared of up here, right? But he's a chap that got tremendous admiration for. And then we've had people up here like McHarg. We fed him pink gin all the evening, and he came up with all his stuff, right? and he did extremely well. We've had Gerrit Ekbo up here, and we've had Browning, and who's the man? Rose came in from Eastern Element. We've had Halprin. We've had them all up here. But I think this is the element that we should now. We've had with the fact that, let's see, we organised, Canada's had 2 IFLA meetings. Harper did one in '68 in Montreal, and I did the one in '72 here.
Mm.
We had a bloody good party here. We had our house down in Caulfield. We had 120 people out, you know, bang, 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 bloody marvelous.
Yeah.
But this is the reciprocation. I still write to Werkmeister in Germany if I want any problems, and I deal with Stoddart down in Venezuela and these sort of people. Right.
Does that mean that there's something international about landscape architecture
It has to
in terms
be.
of design?
Otherwise, it will atrophy.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you cannot develop an intrinsic sort of thing of your own in isolation.
Mm-hmm.
You're always going to be influenced by other people coming in.
Is that because you're dealing with natural resources, do you think? Or?
Oh yes, obviously, because the biotic zones in the world go transverse every country. You get Hawaii, California, Florida, Madagascar, Ceylon, bang, bang, bang. You get bands, biotic zones, and the problems are the same in each one. Period. Mm-hmm. So it's pointless to isolate yourself in a little pocket between the sea and the mountains and say, we're landscape architecture. That's nonsense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It becomes sterile.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's our problem at the moment.
Would you care to expand on that?
Well, I don't think there's enough. What should I say? How can I explain this bestly? I don't think there's a broad enough vision of the society and its role. We don't expand outwards. We don't, for instance, we're not talking now about clear-cut logging. I think, hell, Bill, not one landscape architectural voice has been raised on that. It's stupid. Why? Because they're dead scared that if they do, they offend Macmillan and Bradell or Bentley and Canfor, and they're not going to get anybody work, I'm certain, which is ridiculous. Now, there's this big casino thing coming up in Vancouver. Now, we should be hammering that. No, we don't want it, period. Yeah. Boom. But they won't. They won't.
Doug Patterson spoke against that on the radio this morning.
Yeah, well,
I heard him, luckily
Doug's
enough.
a good head, yes. I like Doug. He's not very happy with this layout thing either. Oh, Doug, I like Doug very much. He's,
but you're right. Where are the landscape architects where is their voice when it comes to environmental issues?
We don't. We don't. In fact, the CSLA policy papers that they used to produce, I haven't seen one now for about 10, 15 years. But they used to produce a whole mass of policy papers on environment and this sort of thing.
I haven't seen them either.
Yeah.
Just sort of continuing along on that that line a little bit. I have 2 things going in my head here. Are there specific projects in Canada that you feel are very significant in terms of landscape architecture?
I think West Carna, very much so. This is where a complete environment had been built out of nothing in Saskatchewan. I think that's incredible. Now, I think otherwise, I think the contribution that has been made is a general, for instance, the Central Mortgage and Housing Corporation will not, in their early days, accept any submission without a landscape architect's plan. Now, that was a big step forward, and this was in the 60s, right? And I think CMHC, we had a meeting in there, a member in there called Rod Humeniuk, Humeniuk, Rod. This was a tremendous step forward. Bang, 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 bang. Now, as a result of all our efforts over the long period of years, we now have mandatory registered landscape architectural plan to secure development permit. That is a big step forward, and at that point in time the development permit is conditional on the client putting a letter of credit forward for the amount of the landscape. In other words, it can't be milked by the bloody architects or the engineers or anybody else, which is what was happening before. So now from that, many of us have served on advisory design panels. Now, these are very important indeed. It means that nearly every municipality, UBC and the rest of them, we have a thing called advisory design panels in which landscape architects are there, important. Now, Doug even went further. He became chair of the Vancouver Planning Commission. Okay, but well, obviously in those positions you can influence quite a bit. I was 6 years on the North Vancouver one, and 8 years on the UBC one. Now, of all the junk that's been put into UBC, God. But it was a wonderful opportunity to shoot down the bloody architects. You know, they'd all strut in with their, graphics and lots of chaps sort of holding coats and things. We say, look, Buster, for God's sake, no, that's ridiculous. You find the big element, I think, that the landscape architect produces in these occasions is what I call congruence. In other words, a growing together. Now, most architecture is anti-congruent. It grows apart. Everybody wants something different. Stupid downtown, bloody glass boxes. When the big earthquake comes, it's all going to fall off, let's say. But in other words, there is no attempt to develop in a congruent style so that the thing evolves, okay? We've got very good examples of it where it has been done. For instance, in Victoria, the new square and Centennial Square there was a congruent development and very successful because of that. Okay, and but you see now what's happening. We're back into what's soon called a monumentality. Everybody's building a bloody monument. Where's the landscape architect? Pick a tame one, put a few bushes around the bottom, and this is ridiculous. It just doesn't work.
Yeah. Along that line, what are some of your ideas as to the future of landscape architecture? Either what is its future or what can be its future? Where can landscape architects affect the future in some way, or how do you see that? The little crystal ball gazing here.
I have to quote my supreme idol, who is Sir Geoffrey Jellicoe. Okay, he says that the only basis of survival is the evolution of the collective landscape. In other words, it has to be developed with all the interests involved. What is the profession best equipped to do that? Landscape architecture, because it embraces all the others, okay? It's no good talking to an engineer, tunnel vision. It's no good talking to an architect, tunnel vision, boxes, okay, and so on and so on. And therefore, landscape architecture embraces all these functions, and you have, if you like, an overview of the elements. So, therefore, the future of the profession is in the organizing of the collective landscape for survival. It sounds a bit pompous, but that's my basis. In other words, and I think I put it in my resume, is the search for a method of balancing human requirements with our environmental constraints, okay? And we're back to the old carrying capacity function, right? When you're dealing with a finite planet, it's no good going on milking the bloody planet, which is what we've been doing. Therefore, sometime, the crunch has come in BC with forestry, the crunch has come in the Maritimes with northern cod. And this is a stupidity we're still practicing. We're talking about growth. We don't want growth, period. In fact, we don't want immigration, I don't think, at this time. No, but I'd like to see the CSLA taking up a paper on that, a policy on immigration.
In terms of any kind of immigration?
Well, I think it has to be very selective, which could be exactly key to requirements for maintaining Canada as it is, a delightful place to live with plenty of space, blah, 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 blah. But all we're doing now is, bloody fool Erickson talks about, 20 million people in BC up to hope. For God's sake, that's ridiculous. You could see the way it's happened in California. 40 million people in California, twice as many as are in. If everybody in California goes to the beach at one point on one day, they get 18 square inches. So, the water demands are now coming. They're getting salt in penetration. They lowered the water table. They're polluting it with the intensive farming. I think eventually the tanks are going to roll north and they'll want water, water, water. And if we don't give it to them, they're going to take it.
Anyway.
So I'm sorry.
That's okay. But how can you give sort of specifics as to how landscape architects can organize sort of for the collective landscape?
Yeah, I think the basic function I find is that, for instance, I do not like to work as a consultant to an architect or an engineer. I like to work as a consultant or landscape architect to the client, direct, boom. Now that gives me status in the other two, and now this, I developed this theme when the town housing came up. I refused to work for an architect. So I convinced the various clients that this was a good thing, and because of that, we managed to get, I think, reasonable environments developed. So the future then is that the individual landscape architect has got to lead. He's got to become a prime consultant. Now, I know that's difficult because in any development, the bulk of the money goes to structure, but I think we've got to be powerful enough in that respect to come up with a specific analysis and criticism of colour, form, location, and all that sort of thing. Things like drainage and so on. Now, you can only do this as an independent element. If you are working for an architect, you're going to be paid by him, although they're always bloody slow, and therefore you haven't got much a sort of muscle to put into it, right? So I would say the future is unlimited for landscape architecture, but we've got to have the individual with a vision and the leadership capability to take advantage of it. I'm not certain we've got it at the moment. In fact, I'm pretty sure we haven't. That cost me beyond the pale, as they wrote.
As you say that you kind of alluded to something along that line earlier when you said that the energy and the impetus that you all had in the 60s to develop the society, that there's not that kind of energy at the moment.
It's dissipated.
Yeah, that there's not anyone that seems to be kind of taking a hold of other sorts of issues and putting that same kind of energy to work.
No, we get specific little things like, Moira Quayle's been doing an urban thing, but okay, but you can't. For instance, what I've been working on up at Langley, I got a big client up there on 640 acres. We're looking at a concept of village development throughout the whole of the Fraser Valley. We don't want to develop Vancouver, to hell with it. We don't want to develop Coquitlam or any of the satellite. We're looking in terms of village element, Penturbia, if you've read the book, where you have a village of probably 1,000 people situated close to an industrial centre so that they can walk to work and so on. This is the thing happening at Seaside in Florida, Penturbia down here in Washington, and we're looking at this very, very strongly indeed. But you're up against a political system which in the valley comprises people who are elected for 2 or 3 years. They're not interested in the future. They're only interested in the immediate aspects of what's going on, and therefore I think one of the things we should be, perhaps as a society or as a group, pushing for is a revision of a political system that is capable of coping with change, which it doesn't at the moment. It's always way behind,
So is there a need then, do you think, for landscape architects to be much more involved in policy development?
Yes,
so that
oh yes,
at the
very much
political
so.
level,
Yep,
so that those kind
yep.
not being reactive, but being proactive.
Proactive.
In the whole.
I can only quote when we had a very big development in North Vancouver of 4,000 houses going on a hillside. I did a paper on the fragility of the hillside as a development area in terms of things like drainage, time of concentration, evapotranspiration, leaf area index, bang, 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 drainage capability, evolution of the stream bed, carrying capacity of the stream bed, blah, 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 blah. Saying, look, if you're going to take 50% of the trees off, every drainage channel has to be double the size to take the peak flow, period. If you don't do that, you're in trouble. They didn't do it and they're in trouble. Okay, but now I teamed up with a hydrogeologist for that, London. Okay, I realised my limitations. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a hydrologist, but I pick somebody and say, here, jump, boom. And I think that one of the things that the individual landscape architect has to develop in his professional career is a rapport with a good engineer, electrical, a good engineer structural, a good engineer civil, perhaps a good architect, a tame architect who does as he's told. This time, and any other expertise, a hydrogeologist, even sculptors like Frank Perry. Now, I think over time, over 40 years, I developed very strong links with people who I felt were competent and loyal, and I hoped that they felt I was the same. So, but we all worked as a group on a sort of ad hoc basis for whatever project we came up with. Okay, now that's the thing I don't think that is pursued enough in the profession at the moment.
But that's something that several people have said to me about landscape architects, that one of their capabilities, a very strong capability, is that they are a team player and that they can function in that role.
I would quote Admiral Rickover, who said that teams are for playing games, period. You're not going to get anywhere with a team. If, as a landscape architect, you've got to be lead. You must lead, must lead, must lead. Now, I know people say, yes, Tattersfield, but you can't do this because you're very much in the minority, blah, 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 blah. But all I'm saying is, well, the environment's been completely screwed up now. Who are the people who can deal with that most satisfactorily? Well, I suggest landscape architects, because they have the expertise, and if they haven't got the technical elements, they know where to get it. Boom, 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 which is the answer, okay? You don't have to be an expert in everything, but I mean, I know enough soil science to be able to pick a good soil scientist to come up and give me this, the screen sizes for this, bang, 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 bang. So thank you, George, here's your money, boom, finish, that's it.
And then use that information for your work,
Yeah, definitely.
Do you see a good future for landscape architects?
Only if the individual has enough moxie to really get on and get it. But what worries me is we're producing a batch of people who are desperately obviously want a job, make a living, and that's it. I find them, perhaps the generation now is in this category. They're not interested in anything other than immediate survival. Now, it may be a result of the hash that's been made of things up to date. I don't know, but it seems to me to get out of this, we've got to show much more initiative and positive sort of reaction to things. As you mentioned, we don't become post-reactive, we have to be procreative.
Yeah, instead of sitting there and taking the stuff as it drops on you and deciding what shape you're going to make.
Crumbs from the table, yes, okay, landscape architect.
But get in there before that.
Yes,
sure,
yeah.
And what kind of changes could landscape architects make? What could they make if they got in to, say, policy making position?
Well, I think what has been achieved now is that, as I just mentioned, the question of approved registered landscape architectural plans for development permit. Now, that's a very positive step forward. Now, another thing I started in '57. I belong to a thing called the International Society for Arboriculture. Okay. Now, what I was getting into is particularly municipalities, loggers, other people were going onto people's property and just cutting down bloody trees. Bang, 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 bang. Now, a tree has an intrinsic value. Okay. The US Treasury Board has accepted the valuation formula that the ISA has produced. So in 1957, I started on this, and our first case was a client in North Van who had about a 48-inch beech tree, and the municipality cut it down, and I estimated out about something like $3,700, bang, and we all went to court. And Nathan Nemetz was a judge. He was so intrigued by this process that we all got in cars and went over there to look at it, the whole court. Well, that's developed. I've got a list of them here, but I've had in the last few years about 50, 60 cases, and this puts landscape architecture in, I think, what Doug Patterson calls the advocacy role. And I think this is where we're missing out. We're not getting into the advocacy role. Mm-hmm. Now, I've now been established in the Supreme Court and Federal Court of BC that my reports and valuations are, in point of fact, not queried. Okay? Now, when you consider that, well, for instance, a man from Toronto bought a little property here up on Indian Arm, about 5 or 6 acres, and he came back one weekend and saw a log boom bobbing off the end. A helicopter logging had been in and taken all his logs off. So I go up there and motorboat and water taxi, we do this, blah, blah. We come up with a valuation of something like $2,100,000, okay? Basic on what is called the basic formula for tree conservation. That's before the courts now. And I just had one in the Cowichan Valley Regional District where 2 people bought lots each side of a leave strip on a creek, which was a park strip, and their contractor took logs off. So that's another $28,000. Okay, bang, 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 bang. And they're moaning like hell, but that's it. And I'm sure that'll go through the Supreme Court and they'll have to bloody well pay. We had one here in West Vancouver where a man built a house above Horseshoe Bay. He wanted to look at the ferries, so he moved onto the property downslope and took out $28,000 worth of trees. Boom, just like that. So we pinned him. That cost him. Yeah. Because they not only get the value of the trees, the aesthetic value, then we have a replacement cost, we have trespassing, malicious damage, punitive, bang, bang, bang. Now, I'm not saying this is, what should I say, a thing that perhaps every individual would want to get into, but here's a case where landscape architecture can provide, if you like, an environmental evaluation system which is legally accepted. Mm-hmm. And that's it's taken 20 years to get it, but it's there, period. I don't have to worry anymore. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, part of the fact is because I am a registered landscape architect, and also I'm a certified arborist, but apart from that, it shows that they're beyond, if you like, the log value delivered to the mill. A tree has an intrinsic value, period, okay? And it lends its architectural, its engineering facilities, control, blah, 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 right the way through. So this is, to me, a very big factor indeed. Yeah. I don't know how it expands in as much as I sat on the board of arbitration for the Highways Department and was going to chop a piece off a golf course. Well, they come to me and I give them a figure. I say, okay, that's fine. Now, the Musqueam Indian Band sued Her Majesty the Queen because the lease had not expired and they were putting their taxes up and taxes up and taxes up. So part of the factor there, I had to produce a valuation for the course as it would be in the year at the end of the lease, which was 2020, I think. Well, it went from something like 2 million, something about 28 million, bang, and they won. Musqueam won this. And so there are lots of possibilities here. The other factors I'm finding, and perhaps this is my age and so on, but I'm doing, for instance, I had a client in North Vancouver who, a landscape contractor, had completed his work, and I inspected it. It was substandard. What is your recommendation? Bloody well do it again. Then the landscape architect came into me, okay? And I said, well, you should have known better. Why didn't you do that? Why didn't you do that? Blah, blah, blah. And they think but I say, no, look, the fact that you're involved in this is your problem. I said, I was hired by the client to critique on $80,000 worth of landscape architecture, which was substandard, and it's substandard, period. Nothing you can tell me is going to alter it, okay? I said, you should have done it. Why didn't you do it? Well, I find out, I won't tell you who it was, but what they did, they put a new student in charge of the bloody job, and he hadn't got a clue. His drainage was shot, the soil was, so it went on. So they had to take the whole bloody lot off, redo it. So I'm not very popular in some sections.
But you have integrity that.
I think so. I touch wood. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, then the tree people, Specimen Tree, came to me. They'd been told to take out a lot of Austrian pine, which the landscape architect says was substandard. So I went and inspected them. Well, not substandard. They don't. They conform exactly to the measurement plane, the actual foliage mass and percentages. Blah 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 blah. So I wrote a report. Now I don't know who the landscape architect was there, but the tree people were as happy as hell. They pay my fee and that's fine. But bang 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 bang. I quote Harris on arboriculture, I quote Shiga on tree biology, I quote Lyon and Davis on tree blah 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 blah. So I think a lot of the trouble is the people who are coming out into the profession now are, what shall I say, not technically, not competent, not technically aware of their responsibilities. So I think this is a big problem. They may be fine on the philosophy of design, blah, 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 blah. But when it comes to the crunch, what you're going to be judged on is what is on the ground, bang, and that's it. And unless you have the adequate technical expertise to achieve this, well, all you do is creating problems.
Yeah, rather than solving them. I think we're just about out of tape. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.